I was traveling home from college when this incident occurred, which was around 16 years ago. I grew up in the heartland and went to school in Miami. So the trip home would usually need a lengthy drive. Typically, I would get there in 2 days. However, I made the decision to travel through the night this time. I departed from my college campus and drove for many hours, only stopping for petrol, meals, or restroom breaks. Actually, I was moving along rather quickly. Things improved more when night fell since there was far less traffic. I made a pit break, bought some energy drinks, and continued driving for many hours. Then, at about 3 in the morning, my gas light turned on, which typically indicated that I had around 45 miles left until I ran out. I was really lost in the wilderness. I made the decision to pull over at the following exit and see whether there was a petrol station. I finally saw an exit and took it. I turned right and continued driving along the road for some time. I traveled 2 or 3 kilometers, but I hardly saw anything. I therefore considered turning around. But then I noticed some promising-looking lights up ahead. I entered a little village when the road made a slight turn. The speed limit was lowered to 20 and on each side there were dilapidated houses. It really seemed to be a deserted town, but I assumed that they would need a petrol station. So I gradually continued going. However, as I continued to go, I stopped seeing any gas stations and saw that most of the residences were older. So I made the decision to go back. I entered a driveway, and as quickly as I did, I noticed the house's front door was open. An older-looking guy entered the room and began to approach me. I signaled with my hands that I was about to turn around before beginning to retreat. The guy seems a bit bewildered. I spotted 2 more folks standing at the ends of their driveways glaring at me angrily as I turned around and started driving in the other direction. It simply truly frightened me out for some reason. I made the decision to disregard it and keep going. But when I returned to the town, things only became worse. On each side of the street in front of the buildings, there were at least 10 individuals who were all gazing at me. I've never seen anything more terrifying. They all had a really chilly appearance. They began to cross the street and almost approach my vehicle as I traveled at the 20th limit. I was unsure about my options, so I increased my speed and continued to do so until I had left. I promptly rejoined the main highway and continued till I noticed another exit approximately 10 miles away. Despite the near encounter, I managed to locate a petrol station and fill up my tank. After that, I took a drive home, although I have no idea where that was. But something about that little village at 3 in the morning and all the people there was just so unsettling. I still get goosebumps just thinking about it. When I was a college student a few years ago, I used to work really late hours during the summer, and I had an internship with a firm that was located in a remote area. There were just farmland and forests for miles around the region. A few weeks or so into the work, one night, I left work at 4 in the morning, and I immediately got in my vehicle and drove home. The average time it took me to return to the temporary flat where I had spent the summer was around 25 minutes. My vehicle spotter began to make itself heard around halfway into the journey. Since I was in college and had a limited budget, it was an old beater. I made every effort to keep the automobile running. However, it ultimately succumbed to its injuries and stopped on the side of the road. There were no other automobiles in sight, and the road was absolutely deserted. Additionally, a little ditch with forests on both sides encircled it. I made many attempts to start the vehicle, but I came to the conclusion that it would not be very helpful. I was not much of an expert when it came to cars, and I had no idea what to do. I was certain it was not gas. I made the decision to dial my roadside help. I was informed that it may take up to an hour for them to arrive given my location. Until they arrived, I made the decision to play on my smartphone and watch video clips. I then inserted my headphones after taking them out. I would estimate that it took me 20 minutes before I heard someone attempting to unlock my rear door. My doors had been closed. Additionally, I assumed the roadside service was nearby. I therefore removed my headphones and peered behind me, hoping to see a vehicle. However, nothing was present at all. The moon was rather large. The light was helping me see very well, I realized. However, I did not see anyone. I simply stood there for a good minute attempting to identify the person who was trying to open my door. I was not dreaming because I was aware of what I heard. Then, when I peered over to the woods, I noticed a tree shifting position. I saw a man-like figure excavating at the foot of a tree, just inside the trees as I turned my head to look closer. He looked to have black hair and a beard that was dark in tone while wearing a blue jacket. That was all I could make out. He was kneeling and used his hands to dig. I felt really uneasy just seeing it. I became even more frightened at the idea that the guy may be attempting to enter my vehicle. My mind was racing with inquiries. Who was this guy, exactly? And why was he out in the middle of nowhere using his hands to dig in the forest? He kept digging for many minutes longer. I just sat in my vehicle, keeping as motionless as I could, in the hopes that he would not approach me. It seemed like this continued on forever. I finally saw headlights and a roadside assistance vehicle behind me. I saw the guy turn and go farther into the trees as they arrived. He did not get up and flee, however. He walked out on all fours, acting like some kind of beast. I could not have been happier to leave that place, and not long after that, I purchased a new vehicle. We can only hope that nothing similar ever occurs again. This incident took place in 2016. My wife and I had just purchased a cabin in the far south, away from where we resided at the time. We planned to visit that area to sometimes get away from everything. When we initially traveled up there, our intention was to stay for the weekend, coming on Saturday and departing on Monday. The journey there took roughly 4 hours, and the setting was rather pleasant. There was a lake with cottages strewn out extremely far apart from one another, all surrounded by wildness. We cherished how isolated it was from the rest of the world. On Saturday, after arriving there, we went fishing before going inside to sleep. There was essentially just a small kitchen, a living area, a bathroom, and a bedroom in the cabin. It was not very spacious, but there was enough room for comfort. Around midnight, just as we were drifting off to sleep, a banging sound was heard at our front door. I had no idea who may be at the door or even be aware that we were here at this particular moment. It was quite unusual, but I made the decision to get out of bed and investigate. I carefully got out of bed and left the room. By the time I entered the living area from the bedroom, the banging became much louder and more of a beating, raising the alarm somewhat. The kitchen window was the only place in the cottage where you could see outside the front, rather than heading straight toward the door. I made the decision to walk to the window, but due to how loud the bangs were becoming, I instead gently tiptoed to the kitchen window. The bangs got louder as I continued to move. They were so stiff at this point. The door may shatter, I thought. I motioned for my wife to stay quiet as I noticed her about to emerge from the bedroom. Looking out the glass, all I could see was a big guy hammering on the door with his back. He needed to be at least 260 pounds and 5.5 feet tall. He was covering his face with a hat, so I was unable to get a clear view of him. I thought about my possibilities for what I may do. I made the decision to put on my porch light in the hopes that it would deter him. I probably made a stupid decision in retrospect, but I had no other options. The guy continued to pound even after I switched on the light. I kept waiting for him to go while I sat on the floor near the window. He finally did. I was aware that was the only way in or out of the cabin, so that's how I felt. But suddenly, at the wall of the cabin's rear, I began to hear hammering. My wife and I remained in place at a hidden location. Fortunately, all of our windows were covered with shades. After roughly 5 minutes of beating at the back of the cabin, it eventually ceased. We waited for something else to pick back up someplace while we sat there. It did not, however. We debated what had just occurred for nearly an hour before deciding to eventually return to bed. That night, I did not sleep very well. We walked outside the following morning and discovered that the guy had left markings on our door and the wall behind our cottage. Additionally, several plants had been tramped on. We debated leaving and taking the day to get home, but ultimately chose to remain. After another day of fishing and exploring the woods, it was good that we did not sign anybody at all. We then returned to the cabin. After a leisurely evening of viewing a movie, we retired to bed once again at midnight. The front door began to rap again after that. My heart sank as soon as I did it. Once again, the banging became louder and louder over time. We made the decision to just wait it out and pray that demand would not break down the door. The man persisted for almost 10 minutes before ultimately fading away. That night, I believe I slept even less. My wife and I found a piece of paper on the floor in front of the door the following morning. When we stepped outdoors, the words "Get out" were scribbled on it. We made the decision to inform the police of what had occurred, and upon the completion of a report with them, we took a car home. Nothing, in my opinion, was discovered. We also made the decision to sell the cabin and purchase a new one somewhere. I have no idea who the guy was or whether he was only frightening us, but we're considerably more content in our new cabin.